cutting up fish and catching fish and had his fishing pole in the water all the time. And I get a picture of this guy with giant nets of salmon coming up, and then after that he was on the docks cutting up the fish and processing them, working in the fish factories there. And I'm like, wow, this guy has a really cool life. And then he talked about traveling all over the world, and it's like, wow, this guy has a really cool life. But until about 2 years ago, I was never able to put a face with the story. And about 2 years ago, I met this guy after having known his poetry 20 years ago. And I'm glad he's featured here tonight. And this is going to be an amazing adventure. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only author of like 10 books, Mr. Wolf Larsen.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you so much to our host. Round of applause, please, for our host, Dave, for putting this together, man. Thank you. It's actually 30. It's actually 30 books on Amazon. But anyway, let me get started. So, the poem begins with one wave after another wave after another wave after another wave of imagery splashing all over you. The poem jumps up. The poem becomes a tornado. The poem is a tornado going like this and like that through the city streets. The city streets jumping into your eyes. The city streets jumping out of your penises. The city streets flying through your brains. The poem is 1,000 languages, all jumping in a million directions. The poem is the noise of construction sites going bang, boom, crash, bang, boom, crash. The poem is a saxophone on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, just splashing the images all over the sky. The sky, the sky, the green, the orange, the purple sky, just drooling down images and colors all over you. A big, abstract, expressionist sky. Jackson Pollock pulling out his big penis, and Jackson Pollock ejaculating abstract expressionism all over the sky, and the sky in turn dripping abstract expressionism all over each and every one of you. And when the abstract expressionism touches you, you start dancing like verbs, going wild, like adjectives flying around each other, adjectives flying around each other like tornadoes. Every language on the planet suddenly becomes a tornado. English tornadoes, Chinese tornadoes, Spanish tornadoes, tornados de español, y de repente el cielo y la tierra están danzando, bailando uno con otro. The Symphony of Chicago starts to play a Boulez, Stravinsky, Beethoven combination that crashes the windows and the walls down. Boulez and Stravinsky and Schoenberg, a kind of like a Beethoven 16-tone scale flying up and down, and the buildings are flying up and down with the music, the streets, the buildings, the faces. And then Manhattan and Chicago begin dancing around each other. The imagery becomes kind of like flying phrases of poetry in English and Arabic and Chinese and Spanish and Portuguese on the streets of Manhattan and Chicago, just flying around each other in this circle. And then the poet pulls out his penis phallus. The poet ejaculates poetry all over the ceilings and the walls and the floors and the walls and the ceilings and the floors drip with poetry. They drip with words that have not even been invented yet. So the poets of all the world, they grab sledgehammers, they grab baseball bats, they grab their big penises, their big pens, and they smash correct grammar into pieces. Because the poet is the violator of correct grammar. Because creativity is a tidal wave that drowns correct grammar. And the poet turns his native tongue into a whore. Since my native tongue is English, it is my duty to turn the English language into a whore. It is the duty of the poet to take out his phallus pen and fuck the English language up the ass. There you go. The poet must impregnate the page with eroticism. The poet grabs Cubism and Fauvism and Impressionism and Futurism into his hands, and the poet shoves all this imagery onto the page. The poet tears open the mind of the reader, and the poet throws all the images of the world into the mind of the reader. The poet runs around and around the language runs around and around the poet, and the poet runs out into the street naked. Everyone runs out into the street naked. Everyone in cities across the world runs out into the streets naked. They scream the poetry, and all of the space aliens throughout the universe hear the poetry. Space aliens become pregnant with the poetry. Then the space aliens all give birth to poetry. And the planet is a green, blue vomit, testicle of poetry. Our very testicles are filled with poetry. Our vaginas are full of poetry. When your fathers were fucking your mothers, and your fathers ejaculated the poetry of their testicles into your mother and impregnated you 9 months before you were born. All of you are the product of your mother's bending over and your father's giving the poetry to your mother. The rhythm of poetry is the rhythm of the bed springs going ka-chink, 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 and the bedpost going bang, a bang, a bang, a bang. That is the image of poetry. You, me, all of us, traded in the bedrooms, traded in the love hotels, traded in the whorehouses, traded in the backseat of cars. Is your father really your father? Who really cares? Poetry is a giant female orgasm splashing across the world. The job of the poet is to pull out his penis phallus and ejaculate poetry everywhere he goes. The woman grabs the pen. She uses the pen as a vibrator. She creates the poetry. The words splash out of her vagina. The words of the poem jump up. The words of the poem are raining upon you from the sky. The words of the poem, they fall out of the trees in the spring. The earth becomes pregnant with poetry. The poetry grows out of the earth with the grass, with the trees. The birds sing the poetry. The painters throw the poetry on the canvas in this color and that color. The musicians see the poetry of colors on the canvas. The musicians play the poetry. They play the poetry of music flying out of their saxophones, flying out of their French horns. The violins of the symphony orchestra flying off this way and that. The sea of violins and the orchestra, playing the masses of people, moving back and forth, people moving across the city streets everywhere. Masses of people, black, brown, black, white, splashing out of the canvases, splashing across the world. The poem is a volcano that's waiting to burst open. The duty of the poet is to grab that sledgehammer, grab that baseball bat, and bash everything traditional into pieces. Because the poetry splashes through the universities. The poetry splashes through the streets. The poetry is the creativity in your balls, the creativity in your vagina, just rising up out of your mouth, rising up to the edge of your hand where you write the poetry. You write the poetry with spermazoa. The spermazoa comes out of the pen phallus and impregnates the page. The poem is 6 billion people. 6 billions of people begin singing the poem at once. They all sing the same poem. The poem is Chinese. The poem is English. The poem flies across the universe. The poem becomes thousands of different phrases of poetry leaving your penis and flying across the universe. There are thousands of different phrases of the same poem going around and around the earth. And the poet is shooting a cubist phrase of poetry across the sky. A futurist phrase of poetry across the sky. An impressionist phrase of poetry across the sky. The poem